Class, good morning. Very few students till now. Chalo, theek hai. So I thought I'll first maybe tell you where we are in the course content. We have in the last 6 or 7 classes that we have had, we have talked about starting from the first module, which was more general, talking about the role of microorganisms, their diversity, and then about the history, which wherein I started from the scientists who first saw microorganisms, so Robert Hooke and Anton van Leeuwenhoek. Then I took you through how the theory of spontaneous generation was refuted, this entire debate in the scientific community. And towards the end, so we talked about Pasteur and how he refuted it. Then we went on to see the contribution of Jenner and Robert Koch. That was the end of the module 1. And right now we are on the second module, wherein we're talking about the cell structure and function of microorganisms. Here we started off with the prokaryotic cell, then the typical features of a prokaryotic cell. Then we went on to the eukaryotic cell to tell you how the two are different. Then I talked about the difference between bacteria and archaea, and here I gave you some basics about the plasma membrane. Now remember, the plasma membrane is a topic of biochemistry, so you will be talking about it in much depth. However, I told you the differences between archaea and bacteria in terms of the plasma membrane. There are many other differences as well. Archaea, as some of you might know, is a completely different kingdom compared to the bacteria and the eukarya now. But we'll talk about the taxonomy later. So today, I will be taking up some representative. I'll be basically talking about the eukaryotic group fungi, and here I'll take up some case studies, some representative organisms to tell you the basic diversity that is present in fungi, how they reproduce, how they grow, and so on and so forth. And then in the next class, I will talk about protists. So for your quiz, we will have all these topics being covered. I mean, we'll have questions from all this on Thursday. Did I say Thursday? Friday, sorry, 16th. Yeah, I will inform you about the platform by Wednesday, because I'm still trying to figure out different platforms for this quiz. It will be mostly an objective kind of paper. Okay, so we will start with fungi. And when I say fungi, without you looking into the net, what is it that comes into your mind? What do you understand when I say fungi? Mushrooms के अलावा बताना. Raise your hands, please. हाँ Vishantan. Go ahead, Vishantan.
Am I audible?
Yes, Vishantan.
Basically, like.
Vishantan, I can't hear you. Can you try reconnecting? Jaskin, are you able to hear Vishantan?
No, ma'am.
ठीक है, तुम ही बताओ पहले.
Am I audible now?
Tell me now, I can hear you.
Ma'am, like basically, the first thing that comes to my mind is the bread mold, like that grows
Correct.
in damp places, like
Yes.
moisture and stuff.
Good. Jaskin?
Yeah, ma'am. Same that the cotton-like masses that have grown on the bread and that lichens also.
Lichens, yes, we talked about lichens, bread mold, और कुछ नहीं. खाली negative पता है. हाँ गोपिका?
Grows on organic substances.
Sorry Gopika, you have to be a little louder.
Grows on organic substances.
Correct, grows on organic substances, huh? And सबसे पहला तो it is of course mushrooms which are edible, you know that that's a part of our daily life, huh? Okay, so the study of fungi,
Yeast, ma'am.
yeast, correct, very good. Yeast also are an important component in our day-to-day life, yes. This is called, the study of fungi is called mycology, and the scientists studying fungus are called, अच्छा fungi और fungi भी कहते हैं, हाँ fungus और fungus तो मैंने सुना नहीं, लेकिन fungal वो सुना है मैंने, लोगों कहते हैं, so I say fungus and fungi. Anyway, the word actually means mushrooms, but it was later referred to be an envelope term for organisms, eukaryotic organisms, which are non-photosynthetic. तो fungi का सबसे important distinguishing feature ये है कि they are non-photosynthetic and they have a rigid cell wall. Mostly they are saprophytes, जैसे गोपिका ने बताया, that they derive their food from dead and decaying organic matter. Now, because they cannot photosynthesize and they feed on organic matter, you can understand that they exhibit economic losses in various sectors. तो तुम लोगों ने अभी मुझे सबसे पहला जो term तुम्हारे लिए strike किया, that was bread mold. But they also affect humans. Of course, food spoilage is one aspect which affects humans. They also cause diseases in higher organisms, plants हो चाहे animals हो. But this is only a fraction of the fungi we know of. तुम लोगों ने जो start किया वो सिर्फ negative से start किया, bread mold बोला, और बाद में you came to yeasts and the other benefits that we encounter from fungi. There are a range of applications of fungi in our day-to-day life. From a major chunk actually is in the food industry, if you see. And also, I don't know if you've heard of this tricha. This is a fungi which is a biocontrol agent. So it's used instead of chemicals for controlling various kinds of diseases in agriculture. Because of the range of the secondary metabolites that fungi synthesize, today many industries are based on fungi or fungal products. In fact, we see a lot of prospect in fungi being employed as microbial cell factories. अगर तुम्हें याद हो, we were discussing microorganisms, especially bacterial cells, as microbial cell factories, wherein they produce or synthesize chemicals or compounds of our interest. So now we see that fungi can actually be a good replacement, or let's say just supplementation to bacterial cells. So in various sectors, whether it is food technology or even pharma, you will see a lot of applications of fungi. Here is a list of applications of some filamentous fungi. Now there are two types of fungi which we'll talk about, but here are just the applications of some filamentous fungi, wherein I would like you to know of some name, maybe you already know them: Aspergillus niger for all these enzymes and acids. Penicillium, I'm sure you all are aware of penicilliums with their importance in the medical sector. And here is a list of enzymes produced by fungi that find application in sectors ranging from, for example, degradation of lignocellulose and help in the biofuel industry to dairy industry, paper production, so on and so forth. In fact, there is a report which says that approximately 200 fungal enzymes have been characterized with significant applications in these industries. Some of the main enzymes that dominate the industrial markets are cellulases, amylases, pectinases, and yeast enzymes, as you know. Even in the natural environment, this was more about the biotechnological application. Even in the natural environment, you will see that they are crucial for the overall upkeep. As majority of them are saprophytes, they help recycle nutrients like carbon, nitrogen, and other bioelements by playing a major role in global biogeochemistry. Then many of them share a symbiotic relationship with other groups of organisms, including higher plants, animals, and even algae. Some important group of fungi like mushrooms and lichens, they produce macroscopic structures also. Their significance in the change of soil structure is also pivotal. So majorly this is by secretion of various antibiotics and allelochemicals. And they digest the recalcitrant complex matter, making the soil more fertile. Of course, they are part of the food chain as well. Now coming to some of the general features of fungi, they are eukaryotes, of course we mentioned that. So you will find demarcated organelles with dedicated functions, that is a complex cellular organization, and all the other typical features of a eukaryote that we have discussed earlier. Then fungi are cosmopolitan. Abhi kisi ne bola ki they grow in damp places. Vishantan ne I don't remember exactly. ठीक है. They have even been found in stratosphere. They have been found in the bottom of Dead Sea, in glaciers in the Antarctic, even deep ocean floors. So they prefer moist and slightly acidic environment and can grow with or without light. They grow best in the presence of oxygen using aerobic respiration, but can survive using anaerobic respiration when oxygen is not available. So for example, जो yeasts हैं, they are intermediate. So they are facultative anaerobes. कोई मुझे बताएगा facultative anaerobes मतलब? Anaerobes मतलब do not require oxygen. Aerobes मतलब they require oxygen. What is facultative anaerobe? Anybody? ये टर्म आने वाला है हमारे कोर्स में कई बार. Facultative refers to a situation which is not, so if required they could be anaerobes, otherwise they are aerobes. So only if the conditions so require they can turn to anaerobes. Now fungi are heterotrophs. जो अभी तक हम देखते आए, they require complex organic compounds as a source of carbon. Just like animals, they cannot make their own food. They take it from the environment. Also, like animals, they are unable to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, so they have to even procure nitrogen from the environment. However, there's a major difference with the nutrition mode of animals and that of fungi. Animals, for example, human beings, we ingest food and then digest it inside the body in specialized organs. While fungi, they perform these steps in the reverse order. Matlab, digestion precedes ingestion. तो पहले digestion होता है. For example, in multicellular fungi, first exoenzymes are secreted extracellularly, which break down the complex matter to smaller molecules, और इसीलिए उनकी soil structure में बहुत important role है. Then the smaller molecules produced by this act of external digestion are absorbed. A similarity with animal cell is that glycogen happens to be the storage polysaccharide, unlike plants wherein the storage polysaccharide is actually starch. Another important point is here that the growth of the fungi is indeterminate, which basically refers to no particular pattern of the filamentous structure, and the structure is affected more by resource availability and the distribution of the resources. Fungi exhibit three major lifestyles when associated with a higher organism. The endophytic lifestyle is when the fungi lives inside the host without negatively impacting the host. On the other hand, biotrophic lifestyle is when it thrives on the living host tissue. Here there is a negative impact, okay? While necrotrophy is when the fungi kills. So biotrophy means the cells are not being killed but are being negatively impacted, while in necrotrophic mode of lifestyle, the cells are actually, the host cells are actually killed. In fact, there are many plant pathogens which start off as a biotroph but then switch to necrotrophic phase and therefore are called as hemibiotroph. I mentioned that fungi enter into symbiotic associations with other organisms. The most crucial of such an interaction is its association with roots of higher plants. And such fungi are called as mycorrhiza. Mycorrhizal associations are what you find. So mycorrhiza, as the term suggests, it's an association of fungi, myco, and plant roots, matlab rhizae. They help plant by nutrient uptake by scavenging to depths and increasing the surface area for absorption. In fact, it's estimated that over 80% of plant species associate with mycorrhizal fungi. And another association that someone mentioned earlier is the fungi entering into an association with a photosynthetic partner, which is either a green algae or a cyanobacteria. I mentioned that fungi cannot photosynthesize. So this association you can understand is important, wherein the fungal partner provides shelter while the algal partner or the cyanobacterial partner performs photosynthesis. Lichens की भी economic importance है, वो ये कि they starting from the fact that they are the first colonizers of barren rocky areas, they help in the formation of soil, and more so they are also used as an excellent indicators of pollution. And then there are also several metabolites of industrial importance which the lichens synthesize. Coming to the morphology of the fungus, the body of the fungus is called a thallus. अब यहाँ पे थोड़ा सा confusion terminology में हो सकता है, please मुझसे पूछना अगर नहीं समझ में आए तो. The body is called thallus. This is a multicellular body without any conducting tissue. This is how it differs from plants and animals which have a well-developed conducting tissue. While some cells are unicellular, the others are filamentous, forming a network called as mycelium. This is what you see on the bread mold when you see this cottony mass. This network is made up of slender tubes called as hyphae. And when I say the mycelium can actually be humongous. Example, the largest organism is known to be a honey mushroom called as Armillaria solidipus, which actually spreads across 2,000 acres of underground soil. So this is humongous, huh? With the mode of nutrition being absorptive, such a filamentous structure helps in increasing the surface area as well as scavenging resources in the surrounding. In fact, with the array of exoenzymes secreted by the mycelium, it can extract nutrients even from highly polymerized compounds such as celluloses or lignins, which are recalcitrant for other microbes. The hyphae, it could either be septate, that is with cross walls, or they could be devoid of any septa, that is the cross walls are absent. The latter is known as a cenocytic mycelium or cenocytic hyphae. Even when the septa are present, you will see that there are pores which lead to flow of material across the cross walls. Now the cell wall of fungi are made of a tough polysaccharide called chitin, while some are also made of chitosan. Chitin is also a component of exoskeleton of insects, if you're aware of this. Chitin gives structural strength to the cell walls of fungi, and the cell wall protects the cell from desiccation and even from predators. It's a long chain polymer of N-acetylglucosamine. Now, can anybody tell me where you came across N-acetylglucosamine? हाँ आशी?
Ma'am, in the phospholipids. Sorry, in the peptidoglycan. Peptidoglycan में use होता है.
Correct. Cell wall. NAM-NAG residues था. N-acetylmuramic acid, N-acetylglucosamine. Huh? So chitin is also made up of. It's made up of only the NAG residue, N-acetylglucosamine. अब यहाँ पे एक दो terminology है जो please देखो, which is unique to fungi. Some fungi, they exhibit dimorphism. That is the occurrence of two growth forms. Now, when you talk of yeast actually is a general term used to describe any fungus that reproduces asexually by budding or fission and which have single cell state. So, yeast does not refer to a particular fungal strain or isolate, but it is a general term. There are fungi called as dimorphic fungi that can switch between mycelial form and yeast-like growth. And this phenomenon is called as the YM shift, Y for yeast-like and M for mycelial shift. This is depending on the growing conditions, though mostly fungi are multicellular organisms. This is very unique to the fungal kingdom. Now, mostly the fungi have a haploid life cycle. Bacteria में हम तुम्हें बता रहे थे कि haploid क्या होता है, humans diploid कैसे होते हैं, जब दो set of chromosome होता है तो वो diploid होते हैं या even polyploid ही हो सकती है. However, fungi, they have a haploid life cycle, but they exhibit a special phase. Again, this is unique to fungi, called as the dikaryon phase. Dikaryon, huh? So, two nuclei exist without fusing with each other. We will discuss it in one of the subsequent slides as well. Fungi have two different morphological stages. You will see that there's a vegetative state and a reproductive stage. And another important feature of fungi is that they can be dispersed over long distances by the production of spores, which could be sexual or asexual spores. The architecture, the arrangement, and the type of spore is one of the major parameters in actually classifying them. This is besides the kind of septa that they possess, cenocytic or cross-walled hyphae. I have to mention that there's a term called perfect fungi, which is used for those fungi which can reproduce both sexually and asexually. Or let's say we are aware of both sexual and asexual stages in this kind of organisms. Those are called as perfect fungi, while there are also imperfect fungi where we have only come across, till now, only come across asexual phases. So that's called an imperfect fungi. The most rich in terms of diversity and the best studied are the dikaryon groups, the Ascomycota and the Basidiomycota. We'll study these in a little more detail later. Now, fungi can reproduce asexually by fragmentation, by budding, or by producing spores. The fragments of fungi can grow into new colonies, whereas during budding, a bulge forms on the side of the cell. The nucleus divides mitotically, and then you will see that the bud detaches itself from the mother cell. अच्छा, यहाँ पे मुझे एक बात बताओ, तुम लोग को माइटोसिस और मियोसिस के बारे में क्या पता है? क्योंकि हम लोग को आगे भी माइटोसिस और मियोसिस के बारे में I'll be talking about it. तो tell me, what do you know about mitosis and meiosis? Anybody?
Unlike asexual and sexual reproduction, those are the differences. Don't know much.
अच्छा.
I don't know which one is which, but in one of the in the sexual form.
तो हाँ जस्किन बोलो.
I mean, mitosis, a single cell divides into two.
अच्छा, और meiosis में?
I remember only mitosis.
Okay, mitosis में तुम लोगों ने स्कूल टाइम में नहीं देखा है कुछ स्लाइड्स या कुछ इसके बारे में नहीं पढ़ा है?
हम 10th में पढ़ा था, बहुत टाइम हो गया होगा अगर पढ़ा होगा तो.
अच्छा ठीक है, ध्वनि बताओ.
Ma'am, mitosis takes place in somatic cells, and one cell divides into two daughter cells, while in meiosis it happens in gametic cells and 4 daughter cells are created.
अच्छा विश्वंतन.
I guess the main difference would be that in mitosis, like you have like the chromosome number remains the same in the daughter cells, and in meiosis it is halved, like it becomes haploid if it's a diploid.
Okay. गोपिका ने हाथ रेस किया था.
Yeah, there are 4 stages in mitosis.
अच्छा, उतना डेप्थ में नहीं जाते हैं कि phases क्या हैं. तो mitotic and meiotic cell division takes place in eukaryotes, not in prokaryotes. Though in prokaryotes also you have asexual reproduction and there is propagation. there you have binary fission, जिसके बारे में हम लोग डिटेल में पढ़ेंगे. माइटोसिस और मियोसिस हमारे कोर्स में नहीं है, लेकिन बहुत सारे ऑर्गेनिज्म में I'll be saying mitotic division, meiotic division, इसलिए I'm asking you. Mitosis, some of the points you already mentioned. So mitosis is when it happens in somatic cells, and when it divides, one parent cell forms two daughter cells, and the two daughter cells are identical to the parent cell because the genetic content remains the same. So if there is a content N, which is the single set of chromosome, the daughter cells will receive N and N. Okay, they are identical to the parent cell. So this is called as an equational division. Mitosis is an equational division. अगर 2n cell है, जैसे for example human beings will grow mitotically by dividing, by the cells dividing. So 2n will remain 2n in the daughter cell, two daughter cell. On the other hand, meiotic cell division, it takes place when there is sexual reproduction, and the main feature to differentiate from the mitotic division is that meiotic division is a reductional division. It divides the content into half. So for example, you start off with 2n, the parent is 2n, and if it's undergoing a meiotic cell division, 4 daughter nuclei will be formed, all with half the content, that is n. And you will find this process taking place, for example, in the gametes, higher organism maybe. तो इसका benefit क्या है meiotic cell division का? If the numbers are halved, then these gametes can fuse to form a 2n, that is zygote या embryo, and there is genetic variation coming from both the parents. So half of the content is coming from one parent while the other half from the other parent. So mitotic division में equational division, the daughter cells are all identical, while in the case of meiotic division you will see a lot of genetic variation. तो जहाँ भी sexual reproduction की बात होती है, meiotic division plays a role, okay? और otherwise growth के लिए mitotic divisions take place, okay? तो यहाँ पे when I'm talking about asexual spores, they are genetically identical to the parent. Mitotic divisions हो रहे हैं, हाँ? The spores may be released either outside the body or they are produced within special sacs called as sporangium. Sporangiospores, for example, are formed in this sac called sporangium. Now there are others, for example, the blastospores, और मैंने कहा कि इसमें spores की बहुत diversity है fungi में, classification ही based as type of spores पे. The blastospores are formed by budding. If you see, these are the parent cells or the parent hyphae, and there are buds formed. While conidiospores, these are exogenous spores produced on the tip of hyphae on special structures called as the conidiophores. Then there are structures like the chlamydospores, which are thick-walled, large resting spores found in various kinds of fungi, and something as simple as arthrospores, which are just fragmented mycelia. So these are all spores formed by asexual reproduction, मतलब mitotic division होता है, और the daughter cell is completely identical to the parent cell. But this will not lead to any kind of variation, okay? Besides these asexual spores, spores are also generated during sexual reproduction. They are characterized by diverse architecture and arrangement. So you can see a kind of basidium. This is a club-shaped structure called basidium on which basidiospores are formed. ये basidiomycota के लिए characteristic है. While you can find, for example, these sac-like structure called as ascus, in which you have ascospores. Another important spore is the zygospore. इसके बारे में भी हम लोग बात करेंगे आगे भी. It has a thick-walled structure, and again, all these are sexual spores, so they have either meiotic division before their formation or after their formation. You will see that meiosis takes place. Now coming to the general life cycle of a fungus, और यहाँ पे भी कुछ terms है जो तुम्हें देखने हैं. In both sexual and asexual reproduction, fungi produce spores. ये तो मैंने तुम्हें भी बताया, हाँ? Now, asexual spores are a fast means of propagation, and they are produced by mitotic division resulting into identical spores. तुम देख रहे हो कि यहाँ पे N है, whether it is a sporangium or whether it is outside a sporangium, I mean it is released externally. This mitotic division leads to the propagation of the N lifestyle. I said they are mostly haploids, so you will find a major phase which is the haploid phase, and this N content remains N by this mitotic divisions, which is asexual. Up, when you see that there is N which is being propagated, there is absolutely no chance of any evolutionary significance. There is no evolution or development of the fungi because there is no difference in the sexual content in the genetic makeup. And you know that for evolution to take place, you need to have variations. Okay. एक और चीज organisms में तुम्हें देखना होगा कि in lower organisms, for genetic diversity, the organisms have to undergo sexual reproduction, but this is only taking place under adverse conditions. So microorganisms enter into sexual reproduction only under adverse conditions. Otherwise, if they have prolific nutrients or optimum conditions, they will also reproduce, they will only reproduce by asexual means. Now, sexual reproduction में क्या होता है? Here in compatible hyphae, जिसको कि प्लस और माइनस से यहाँ पे डेजिग्नेट किया गया है, two different hyphae, they fuse with just the fusion of the cytoplasm. This step is called as plasmogamy, जहाँ पे सिर्फ cytoplasm fuse करता है. Now, before the nuclei fuse, there is a phase in which there is coexistence of two nuclei. जो आपको हम बता रहे थे कि fungi में it is a unique phase. This is called as the dikaryon phase. Though this is a very short duration phase, it might, however, sometimes be a longer phase as well. Once the nuclei fuse, this is called as karyogamy. हाँ, karyon जहाँ पे भी होता है मतलब nucleus को refer कर रहे हैं, और gamy मतलब fusion. तो यहाँ पे N plus N after karyogamy will become 2N in the resulting zygote, and this small phase is the only phase which is a diploid phase. Finally, the reductional division that I mentioned, अब haploid life cycle वापस चाहिए, 2N हो चुका है zygote से and genetic variation has been generated. तो a reductional division takes place which is meiosis, which brings back, तो 2N से अब N हो गया, which brings back the haploid state. Spores are generated, these are sexual spores, okay? So they are generated which germinate to form newer individuals. Now the unique part here is that plasmogamy is not immediately followed by karyogamy, unlike in other organisms where immediate fusion of nuclei takes place. Okay, यहाँ पे life cycle clear है या किसी को कोई question है तो पूछो. Most fungi spend their lives in haploid state reproducing asexually. ठीक है? And like I said, sexual reproduction is only when there is adverse conditions. अगर ये clear है तो हम representative organisms पे जाने वाले हैं, and we'll talk of one filamentous organism, one single-celled organism. ठीक है, I don't see any hands being raised. तो let us move to what you all mentioned. You all know of this. It is the commonly occurring bread mold called as Rhizopus, and इसका पूरा नाम है Rhizopus stolonifer. It is a member of the zygomycota. तो अभी मैंने आपको sexual spore में zygospore दिखाया था जिसमें ornamented wall था, thick cell wall था. It not just spoils bread but is also responsible for spoilage of many different fruits. And the thallus or the body is mycelial in this case. In fact, जो body है ये cenocytic body होती है. The mycelium can be differentiated into nodes and internodes. The zone between two nodes is called internodes. From the nodes, you have branched rhizoids growing downward for anchorage as well as absorption of food. The internodal region is called as stolon, which when touches the substratum, from there again it forms the nodal region, that is rhizoids develop. Now here in asexual reproduction, the tips of aerial hyphae, they swell and develop into a large sporangium. अब sporangium क्या था? वो sac था जिसमें की spores were formed. The sporangium differentiates into multinucleated sporoplasm, and a vacuolated, the structure on which you see these spores is called a columella. Each nuclei forms a sporangiospore. The columella upon maturity collapses, releasing the sporangiospores in the atmosphere, and the sporangiospores then attach to substratum and germinate to give rise to mycelium. The entire thing is through mitotic divisions. What I wanted to say was, here you have the characteristic formation of a sporangium and a sporangiospore as a asexual spore. Now coming to sexual reproduction. The hyphae of two different strains or mating types, you can say, they meet at the tip. Then septa is laid. I said these are cenocytic organisms. So here there is a septa which is laid to delineate the progametangia. It's yet to form a gametangia. It's a progametangia. And this is called plasmogamy, like I said. Now inside the gametangium, it's called a gametangium when you have fusion of the two nuclei to form a 2n zygote. Then the wall of the zygosporangium thickens and forms the characteristic zygospore. Now zygospore, मैंने कहा कि ये adverse conditions में form करता है, तो zygospore is actually a resting state which can stay so for months together. And when there is favorable conditions, then you have a meiotic cell division taking place. अभी ये 2n हो चुका है, and you saw that they were n earlier, so meiotic cell division होता है, and there is a cell which forms again a kind of a sporangium wherein you have n spores released. N मतलब यहाँ पे contents है. So spores are released for attachment to the substratum and subsequently germination. So this is how process takes place in the sexual reproduction and spore forming during the sexual cycle. This is one of students. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, there seems to be some
Yes,
issue
ma'am.
with the network. Just give me a minute. दिख रहा है क्या presentation? One of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. ठीक है, तो rhizopus filament fungi था. Now I'm going to talk about a single-celled fungus, and the best example is of Saccharomyces, also of importance in the food industry. It's a unicellular and a uninucleate non-mycelial fungus. The cell wall is made up of three layers of mannans and chitins and glucans, and there's a well-developed vacuole present in mature cell. We're talking about Saccharomyces. This is a member of Ascomycota. अभी हमने ascus देखा था, sexual reproduction में ascus देखा था, and this is also an organism which has a dikaryon phase. Here, asexual reproduction is commonly either by budding or fission. Now, in the case of budding, you will see a small bud or daughter cell is formed on the parent cell. The nucleus of the parent cell splits into a daughter nucleus and migrates to form a separate cell. So the bud continues to grow until it separates from the parent cell, forming a new cell. In fact, before it separates, it might start the process of budding. So eventually it looks like a pseudomycelium. There's no mycelium, however, the cells and the newer cells adhering to each other makes it look like a mycelium. So it's called a pseudomycelium. In the case of fission, the cells divide by a medial fission. Plate is laid down to produce two daughter cells of equal size. Now, in the case of sexual reproduction, the different mating types here designated, if you see as A and alpha, they fuse undergoing plasmogamy. And then there is the fusion of nucleus called as karyogamy. Again, here there might be a delay in this process, completion of the sexual cycle. And during this delay, it might happen that the diploid cells may bud off to form a population of diploid cells. But eventually, the zygote develops into a sac-like structure called ascus, which undergoes meiosis. And so here basically it's representing one cell dividing into 4 cells, like I mentioned earlier. And the 4 ascospores, these are released from the sac to germinate into newer individuals. Okay, so with that, that brings me to the end of the presentation. I would like you to ask me if there are any questions, and then I'm just going to share a link of a video which you are which you can see now. Okay. Before that, I just wanted to show you these pictures of some giant fungi. So they are no longer microscopic. These are giant puffballs and truffles. Maybe you've heard of truffles as delicacies. There are 2 chapters that are online on fungi. So I've mentioned the links here. And then there's certain interesting read that I had. Now tell me if you have any questions. So we talked about the general features of fungi, their economic importance. Then we talked about their morphology, thallus, mycelium, hyphae, बहुत सारे terms था. Dikaryon stage था. Then there was a YM shift that I mentioned. ये सब कुछ चीजें unique हैं fungi को. Then I took up 2 organisms, one a filamentous organism and one single-celled organism, जिसमें तुमने देखा कि basic lifestyle बिल्कुल same थी. So there is plasmogamy and karyogamy. If there is a delay between plasmogamy and karyogamy, then you have this dikaryon phase, जहाँ पे 2 nuclei का existence एक साथ होता है. And I tried to tell you what mitosis and meiosis is. So meiosis, sexual reproduction, it is important because you have to half the content of the zygote which is formed, क्योंकि primarily ये haploid organisms हैं. Yeah, other than that, I told you of some associations that fungi have with higher organisms and lower organisms. So lichens lower organisms के साथ और higher organisms के साथ, for example, the mycorrhiza. Now tell me if there are any questions. कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है, सब कुछ क्लियर है. So there's a video for this is approximately of 10 minutes. I would want you to see it now.
Excuse me, ma'am.
हाँ पूछो.
Ma'am, I had a question. Ma'am, like in Saccharomyces, like as you mentioned that we have both methods of reproduction, asexual and sexual. So how does the organism like know when to undergo sexual and when to undergo asexual reproduction? Is there any specified, like are there any specific conditions for?
मैंने कहा था किसी कोई और मुझे बताएगा इसमें से आंसर करेगा. वैसे कौन पूछ रहा है? विशांतन पूछ रहे हो क्या?
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody who would like to answer that? मैंने बोला है कि सेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन कब होता है? Anybody?
During adverse crisis.
Only during adverse, whenever there is nutrient deprivation हो. तो basically क्या होता है कि जब वो सेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन करता है तो एक तो उसको इवॉल्व होना है, इसलिए वो करता है, चाहे वो किसी भी तरह का स्ट्रेस हो. इट कुड इवन बी टेम्परेचर स्ट्रेस, इट कुड बी डेफिशिएंसी ऑफ न्यूट्रिएंट्स. द प्राइम रीजन इज ऑफ कोर्स कि सेक्सुअल वेरिएशन चाहिए उसको. एंड द अदर थिंग इज these spores can then evade the stress and then meiotically divide and germinate again. तो अगर सेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन होना है तो there has to be some adverse conditions, Vishantan. The cell
is this some sort of a natural selection sort of process,
yes,
or
yes,
that
exactly.
it evolved into, or?
Correct. This is a natural selection क्योंकि when it is very easy to form to divide asexually. Okay, बहुत सारे spores individually. You don't even need a second organism here. An organism can divide asexually, which it does whenever there is a condition with prolific nutrients या अच्छे optimum conditions है, तो it will continue to do asexual reproduction. इसीलिए वो sexual mode में जाएगा ही नहीं. वो statement वहाँ figure में सिर्फ इसीलिए था दिखाने के लिए कि asexual reproduction is a common phenomenon. Sexual reproduction is rare and takes place only during some kind of stress.
Okay.
और सेल परसीव कर सकता है, स्ट्रेसेस को सेल परसीव करता है. ठीक है, प्लाज्मा मेम्ब्रेन जैसा मैंने बताया था या आउटर कवरिंग्स स्ट्रेस को परसीव करते हैं.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so I'm पेस्टिंग दिस लिंक. वैसे तो हम इसमें भी रन करने वाले हैं, बट आई एम श्योर कि ऑडियो इश्यूज होते हैं तुमको, इसलिए तुम लोग इससे भी देख सकते हो. एंड देन वंस यू हैव सीन दिस, डिड यू रिसीव द मैसेज? हाँ ठीक है, देयर इज अ डिले. Then you can actually, once you've seen this, you can leave the meeting. We'll meet on Thursday then. ठीक है.
Curiosity Stream, which is the sponsor of this video. The documentary takes a much deeper look into the biology concerned with the study of fungi. It might not sound like the most interesting thing to make a video about, but fungi are some of the most incredible and important organisms on the planet, and have been throughout the history of the Earth, possibly having been around for up to 1 billion years. Distinct from both plants and animals, fungi are their own separate kingdom, with literally millions of species coming in all shapes and sizes. One fungus to the next can be as different as a snake and a giraffe, or a chicken and a dung beetle. Although we might tend to think of mushrooms when we think of fungi, this is actually only the fruiting body of the fungus, with much more going on below the surface. Some fungi are microscopic, invisible to the naked eye, while one fungus, the humongous fungus, is believed to be the single largest organism that exists by area, covering 2,200 acres in the US state of Oregon. For some people, the word fungus might stir up negative connotations, and of course some fungi can cause infections or diseases, while others are poisonous, and that furry stuff growing on your strawberries, that's a fungus too. However, while the bad is often visible and obvious, fungi are very much a force for good as well. We just don't notice it. Fungi are not something we tend to think about often, but they are, and especially have been, immensely important to the ecosystem of this planet. In fact, it's no understatement to say that life as we know it would not be possible without fungi. To understand how, we need to go back a few years. Well, a few billion years. Life in the form of single-celled organisms had already been around for a long time in the oceans, but as far as we know, the land was largely rocky and barren of life. Things started to change when some early bacteria developed the ability of photosynthesis, the process of converting the sun's light into nutrients. Over time, the byproduct of this, more oxygen in the atmosphere, led to the acceleration of more complex organisms in what is known as the Cambrian explosion, about 540 million years ago. But again, this was effectively confined to the water. The transition of more complex life forms to land was made possible because of fungi and their unique ability. Fungi can eat rocks, breaking them down and turning them into soil. This is achieved by secreting digestive enzymes as well as through mechanical pressure. Fungi were able to access nutrients that were otherwise unavailable to any other organism at the time. It was commonly thought that a short 60 million years or so after the Cambrian explosion, fungi began to move onto land. They would have most likely benefited from access to more than 2 billion years of bacteria on the shore to feed on. Of course, the fossil records from this period have quite significant gaps, so there's plenty of uncertainty, with actually the possibility that fungi had already been on land for a full 500 million years earlier. However long fungi had been on land beforehand, we are fairly certain that they were eventually followed by small protoplants, simple organisms that could photosynthesize. Fungi had minerals and plants had photosynthesis. They both needed what the other had to survive. Fungi and plants began to cooperate in a process known as symbiosis, forming a mutually beneficial relationship. As the fungi and plants began to spread, colonizing the land, they began to turn the earth green. The soil became more suitable for many other types of plants that had yet to evolve, eventually allowing for some to become independent of the fungi. With ecosystems becoming more complex, new dynamic balances were established. The increase in oxygen produced by plants was balanced out by a growing population of organisms that needed the oxygen to live. Likewise, the organic matter that started to build up after things would die needed to be recycled so it could continue to be used. This is where fungi come in. To put it simply, fungi eat death, By breaking down dead things, they allow the nutrients to be used again by living things. This set up another important cycle that is fundamental to sustaining all life on Earth, with fungi serving as one of the final building blocks for the world we know and love today. Of course, while new cycles were being established and developed into what would guide our modern ecosystems, older relationships continued to thrive. In particular, the symbiosis between plants and fungi, called mycorrhiza, has continued to change and evolve even to this day, allowing more complex partnerships to form. There are two types of mycorrhizae: ectomycorrhiza, in which the fungus wraps itself around the roots of the plant, and endomycorrhiza, in which the fungus will actually penetrate the cell wall of the plant, entwining itself around the cell membrane. But as invasive as this sounds, this can actually make it even easier for the plant to benefit. The plant will happily let another organism literally live inside it because the fungus helps the plant derive more nutrients. Today, the vast majority of plants benefit from a symbiotic relationship with various different species of fungi. Some numbers have suggested as high as 90% of plants in the world. Some plants, after millions of years of evolution alongside fungi, still rely entirely on them for survival. The orchid plant family, for example, has virtually no independent energy reserve during its germination stage. That is, while it's growing from a seed into, well, a plant. Now, many orchids engage in a symbiotic relationship with fungi that is not mutually beneficial. Many of these species are actually a parasite to certain fungi, in which the plant will effectively suck the energy out of the fungus, in this case referred to as the host. At the same time, the fungus may be involved in a symbiotic relationship with another plant, so the orchid indirectly gets its energy through photosynthesis, even though many of these species have actually lost the ability to photosynthesize themselves. Parasitism can work the other way around, of course, with a fungus that is a parasite to a plant. As well as the exchange of nutrients between fungi and plants, fungi can actually help the plants exchange nutrients among themselves. For example, a small tree in a forest with limited access to sunlight could be fed more nutrients to help it, thus growing tall enough to be able to photosynthesize on its own. These more complex types of interactions between a fungus and potentially many different plants, from the smallest flowers to the tallest trees, are known as common mycorrhizal networks. Fungi are capable of connecting entire forests, which can sort of be thought of as nature's internet, or somewhat more comically, the wood wide web. Fungi are able to facilitate communication between plants, which can be especially strong if the plants are of the same species. Now, obviously plants aren't literally having a conversation with each other, they're not sentient. However, the communication they are capable of is still pretty impressive. While plants are able to communicate via the air as well, via the fungi is much more effective. Signals and cues are transferred between plants which can influence behaviour. For example, fungi can mediate the transfer of chemicals that plants produce to stunt the growth of their neighbouring rival plants, such as by depriving them of nutrients or inhibiting their photosynthesis. These so-called allelochemicals may be used against herbivores such as insects that might want to eat the plant. Alternatively, fungi can also facilitate the warning signals that affected plants send to unaffected plants, triggering the plant's defensive response. Such a response could come in the form of a chemical that acts as a repellent to the attacker, which could be a pathogen, something that gives plants diseases, or again, a herbivore. Of course, this isn't just the fungus being altruistic, it's just that it's in the best interest of the fungus that the plant survives, allowing the continuation of their mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship. Fungi have played a key role in the development of the world as we know it. They may not always be visible, and they're not usually something we think of as being all that important, but fungi are an unseen cornerstone of their ecosystems, silently pulling the strings behind the scenes, forging relationships with many other organisms, both alive and dead. Of course, it's not just plants that fungi interact with. Us humans have a long history with fungi as well. Whether it be as a food source or the yeast we need for our beer and bread, their medicinal purposes, pest control, and so many other uses, fungi have always been there. Always there as an influential part of not just the history of our planet, but of human history as well, both for good and bad. The topic of fungi has proven to be one of the most surprisingly interesting topics I've made a video about. This video was actually inspired by a very compelling documentary I watched called The Kingdom: How Fungi Made Our World. The documentary is available on CuriosityStream, which is the sponsor of this video.
Okay, students, so we had covered most of it in our talk, but here there were some very amazing pictures, and I hope now you know that www also stands for Wood Wide Web. Okay. So, ठीक है. Now that brings us to the end of the class. You may exit the meeting. Thank you all.
Ma'am,
हाँ पूछो.